Close your eyes for a moment. Feel salt on the breeze and the tremor of distant bronze shields. Tonight we set sail, not for the well-lit harbours of Zeus and Heracles, but for the quieter inlets where lesser-sung champions wait. Their names might not echo from every marble pedestal, yet their footprints lace the very grain of Greek myth. Kings who wove whole cities together with nothing but resolve, huntresses who outran the wind, princes who traded comfort for impossible vows, and wanderers whose cunning proved sharper than any spear. Across the next 2+ hours, we'll thread labyrinths, stalk boars through moonlit orchards, bargain with river gods, and outfox monsters born from humankind's oldest fears. Some of our travellers will chase glory and find tragedy. Others will shoulder grief and discover an unexpected kind of heroism. A few may even glimpse redemption in the shimmer between sea and sky. Though, as you'll hear, every triumph extracts its price in the coin of fate. Each story you're about to hear flows as a miniature epic, a full arc of origin, ordeal, and aftermath, told in richly painted detail so you can taste the campfire ash, hear the harpstring hum, and feel the jolt when bronze meets bone. I'll guide you chronologically through a loose sweep of the mythic age, but don't worry about memorizing family trees. Just let each tale pull you forward, the way a half-forgotten melody insists on its next note. And if this is your first voyage with us, welcome aboard. To everyone returning, your steady support is the wind in these sails. If the stories move you, please tap the like button and consider subscribing. It's a simple way to tell the algorithmic fates that long-form myth still matters, and to make sure you never miss the next chapter. But enough of that. Whether you're here for study, for bedtime immersion, or for company on a long commute, settle in. Find a comfortable chair, dim the lights, maybe slip on headphones if the world outside is noisy. The Aegean is dark, the oars are poised, and the first horizon is already lightening to a promise, or perhaps a warning. Breathe in. Exhale slowly. Our voyage through the hidden corridors of Greek legend begins now. Idomeneus. Vows carried on salt spray and blood. The Cretan coast rises from the Libyan Sea like a tawny lion rousing from scented sleep. Limestone jaws, olive-pelted shoulders, turquoise currents licking a main of caves where waves speak in thunder-chamber tongues. Into this topography of stone and salt was born Idomeneus, grandson of Minos and rumoured bloodkin to Zeus himself. Midwives later swore the infant did not shriek, but exhaled one decisive bark, as if ordering the sea breeze to adjust its rhythm. Palace astrologers cast horoscopes and blanched. The boy's chart tangled royal stars with reef-sharp omens. Deucalion, war-scarred father, half believing, half skeptical, kissed the downy head and said only, "Then we will teach him to steer storms, not fear them." Lessons began before he owned a full set of milk teeth. Nursemaids knotted a rope round his waist and lowered him onto the deck of a mackerel sloop to shuffle among thrashing silver bodies, so he would learn balance on planks that rose and fell. He toddled the length of the keel, cooing at sea spray, as gulls circled overhead like white scribbles on a blue page. On shore, spearmasters drilled older boys beneath pomegranate shade. Idomeneus staggered forward with a makeshift reed, mimicking lunges. When the tutor laughed, the child cracked the reed across his own knee and picked up a real practice spear, oak length, bronze tip, too heavy, yet he managed 2 clumsy thrusts before falling. The tutor stopped laughing. Meriones, Fox's slender cousin 2 summers younger, became his mirror and echo. They napped under fig leaves, stole figs from pantry baskets, bled the same crescent gouge on elbows, learning how far a branch can bend before it breaks. At 10, they stole away at dawn, paddled a hide-stretched coracle out of sight of the palace jetty, and caught a swordfish 3 times their combined weight. They returned long after dusk, all blistered, but triumphant, dragging the kill across sand. Deucalion's fury melted into awe. That night, by torchlight, the cousins slit their palms with a small bronze dagger, pressed wounds together, and repeated the oath they had heard sailors utter on star-drowned crossings. My life runs in your veins. Your breath feeds my heart. Cretan childhood ends the first time you kill something larger than yourself. Raiders from Phaselis sailed into the Gulf of Mirabello, torching fishing shacks, lifting goat herds. Deucalion rode north with 50 hoplites, taking Idomeneus only as shield-bearer. But when battle turned to alley brawl, a pirate chief scarred ear to chin cornered father and son beneath a collapsed awning. Deucalion's spear snapped on a beam. The raider swung an iron axe. Idomeneus shoved his father aside and rammed the jagged half-spear into the man's throat. Blood hit his face hot as forge sparks. The pirate's eyes widened, reflecting a boy who might never again be wholly innocent. Afterward, Deucalion washed his son's cheeks in sea water, studying the steady hands, and whispered, "You know the marrow of kingship now. To save, you must be willing to spill." Seasons cycle like orbeats. Puberty gives Idomeneus storm-grey eyes above new cheekbone shadows. He and Meriones chase lions up Mount Ida, track boar prints through myrtle thickets, and experiment with Phoenician design, double-curved hulls that cut chop instead of riding over it. Smiths learn to stand ready when the cousins stride in, arguing about rivet angles, seeding Knossos' reputation for seacraft unrivaled since Minos. Before long, merchants pay extra to load their cargoes on youthful prototypes, trusting the instincts of boys said to have salt water for blood. On an autumn afternoon scented with grape must, a black-sailed ship slips into Knossos harbour. Its banner shows twin serpents entwined around a staff. Menelaus of Sparta. Courtiers gather under painted colonnades. Heralds announce the impossible. Helen, Queen of Laconia, Jewel of Greece, has been carried off to Troy by Paris, son of Priam. Agamemnon, High King of Mycenae, calls every oath-bound ally. Some Cretan elders grumble they owe no blood for Spartan outrage, but omens accumulate. An eagle dropping a hare on palace steps, soldiers dreaming of lions pacing narrow ships, amphorae of oil cracking without cause. Deucalion holds council, yet Idomeneus stands before any vote is cast, spear vertical, and declares Crete will answer. He promises 80 ships, cedar spines, cypress ribs, bullhorn prows painted red-berry bright. Only Agamemnon will muster more. That night, alone on Ida's flank, Idomeneus ascends to an altar older than spellings, just a slab where sulphur gas winds from a vent like whispers from earlier ages. Laurel and goat hair burn in a shallow brazier. He pours unmixed wine, thick, purple, almost black, into the fissure and pledges, "Poseidon Earthshaker, deliver me through storm and spear hail, grant triumph beyond Ilion's walls, and I swear by brine and stone to sacrifice the first living thing I behold upon my homecoming, goat, stallion, or man." The ground hums once, a giant lyre plucked beneath his feet. Then hush. He descends at dawn, vow lodged like a flint splinter in soft flesh of memory. 9 years of war melt seasons into one long ringing moment, tempered only by exhaustion. The first assault up Troy's battlements ends in a rain of stones and boiling pitch. The second leaves Scamander's reed bed stippled with shields like autumn leaves. Through it all, Idomeneus becomes the Greeks' iron keel. He lacks Achilles' comet-like blaze, lacks Ajax's yard-thick brawn. Yet before battles commanders look to the Cretan lines the way sailors gauge horizon for weather. If the bullhorn standards stand firm, despair cannot. He meets Hector spear-tip for spear-tip, trading blows until both armies blur into dusk. He and Meriones invent silent signals, 2 fingers spread for flank pivot, a wrist twist for upward thrust, and Trojan scouts swear they move with single will, crow and shadow. When Achilles sulks in black canvas fury, Hector burns Greek ships, and hope seems afraid sail. It is Idomeneus who drives his contingent into Trojan ranks, roaring the bull leap cry of ancestral games. Shields clash, spears bite. He kills 15 men that afternoon, many not yet grown into full beards, and dreams that night of a staircase slick with blood leading nowhere. On the day Patroclus dies in Achilles' armor, wave after wave of Trojans crash around the corpse. Idomeneus plants his shield as a movable wall, while Meriones drags the body away. Arrows thunk into wood like hail. Later, when Achilles vows retribution, he clasps Idomeneus' shoulder in grim gratitude. "You saved him for the pyre," Achilles says. "That is enough." Idomeneus merely nods. War has eroded language into gesture. Winter of the 9th year, snows dust the peaks above Ilion, and Odysseus brings a carpenter named Epius to explain how a hollow horse might topple towers no spear could breach. Idomeneus offers the best woodwrights from his fleet, artisans who know how cedar must flex or shatter. He tests every dowel personally. The horse must bear weight of 30-odd men under sinew tension stress. When at last the belly is sealed, and the Greek host feigns retreat, he leads his Cretans to burn field tents, scattering ashes into wind to fool Trojan scouts. The night inside the horse tastes of sweat and cedar resin. Crammed in darkness, men breathe shallow. Praying joints will not creak. Idomeneus counts heartbeats until the rumble of oak on stone tells him the gift has cleared the gates. He presses knuckles to the curved wall, feeling each drag, each tilt, marking a map of the enemy city by vibration alone. Hours later, Sinon opens the hatch. Moonlight spills like milk. They rappel ropes down to rooftop, blade tips swaddled. The slaughter is surgical, necessary, regretted only in nightmares. At dawn, Idomeneus stands on Priam's high wall, watching flames gutter from temples that had withstood generations. Gold veils and baby blankets drift in smoke like lost birds. He tastes ashes, cannot tell if he is savoring victory or choking on it. Plunder he allows his men is modest, a silver astrolabe whose gyres could chart 7 spindled stars, a poet's lyre gifted to palace muses, Hector's reserve spear to hang in Knossos as warning that even towering legends fall. No wagons sag with Trojan women, no altars stripped. He wants only the horizon and a wind that smells of time, of goats, of terraced vineyards waiting to be pruned. The wind comes black-winged. 5 days out, clouds stack like bear pelts. Gulls shriek inland. On the 6th, lightning slices a mast. Spray freezes into glass needles. Sailors bawl hymns they have not sung since childhood. Amid the chaos, Idomeneus glimpses a figure strode across waves, Poseidon, beard of storm foam, trident biting the sky. Memory detonates, first living thing upon homecoming. He whispers, "A goat, let it be a goat." But thunder laughs. At dawn, home headlands blush rose gold. Fishing boats bob at anchor, nets drying like lace. On the shore, a lone silhouette runs into the surf, waving both arms, shouting across water's static hiss. A boy of 15, limbs colt awkward, hair pale as barley. Orsilochus, son left behind when war drums first sounded. The king's breath fractures. Crewmen swallow prayers. They make anchor, oars splash. Idomeneus steps into knee-deep shallows. Feet numb, yet flame-seared. Father and son embrace. His hands memorize the curve of shoulder blades, the slight sun-warm scar above the ear. He leads the boy to the altar on Knossos' western cliff, the same slab where he made the vow. Sea winds hiss through juniper. He druggies wine with poppy, so the boy sleeps murmuring questions about battles he'll never see. Then bronze flashes, quick, surgical. Blood runs between his toes into sea-carved cracks. No thunder follows, only gulls overhead, white flecks turning circles like fragments of broken vases. Knossos reels. Women drop amphorae at the story, wine pooling like prophecy fulfilled. Priests denounce the king's piety as hubris. Plague follows, whether by miasma or mass grief. Infants cough themselves blue. Ewes birth stillborn lambs. Assembly gathers beneath olive-wood rafters, demands exile. Meriones pleads, voice raw, but no tide turns. Idomeneus sets crown and scepter at the temple threshold, lifts a sea-worn helm, boards a single trireme with 30 loyal marines, and casts off, king without kingdom, man without son, sailing into brine of regret. They steer west, guided by a star that seems to flicker whenever doubts crawl forth. Storms herd them to Calabria's stony heel. A Messapian settlement clings to tidal flats. Walls half fallen, fields salted by corsair raids. Elders kneel, offering land in return for protection. Idomeneus surveys ragged ramparts, sees a chance to hammer ruin into refuge, and accepts. He orders a palisade of olive trunks, drills boys just past puberty in phalanx footwork, and teaches fishermen to coat nets in pitch, so sparks cannot ignite them during night attacks. When Illyrian corsairs next descend, they meet Cretan tactics stitched to Italian zeal. The sea foams red. Survivors crawl back to ships. Calabrian mothers name newborns after the stranger king. Yet triumph never quiets the silent wine cup hours. Each dusk, as violet shadows plate the sea, Idomeneus climbs a bluff overlooking surf, pours unmixed wine at cliff's edge, and whispers a story to waves that once betrayed him. He speaks not of war glory, but of the single heartbeat, when vow outpaced love. The Adriatic wind whisks away each confession, but he knows Poseidon and the dead both listen. Meriones remains his shadow, though years frost temples. They duel plague and famine with carpentry, canal digging, and straight-grained justice. But fever finds Meriones on inspection of marsh trenches. He dies delirious, muttering of Scamander's reeds. Idomeneus lights the funeral pyre himself. Hector's captured spear goes into the fire, a final honor to a friend who carried more than his own fate up Troy's wall. Calabria prospers. Vineyards green, granaries fatten, children learn Doric lullabies. Elders press Idomeneus to remarry. He chooses Calianera, widow of a slain counsellor, gentle, steadfast, eyes like overcast seas. She bears 3 daughters. Dinners bloom with laughter. On Orsilochus's death day each year, she lays a wreath of barley stalks on the hearth and sits quietly until the last ember dims. In his 70th winter, Lucanian tribes mass at Calabria's river frontier. Councils plead for young generals, but Idomeneus straps on armor dulled to pewter, creaks into an old chariot, and rides at sunrise. Bones ache, but his mind remains flint keen. He arranges staggered phalanxes, lures Lucanians into a feigned retreat, then snaps a flank around them like a steel trap. Victory comes at dusk. The old king drinks rainwater from helm rim, laughing at life's stubborn refusal to end gently. That night, his heart gutters to a final silence in Callianira's embrace, content yet still listening to distant surf. They into him atop the sea bluff, he sanctified with regret. Ship captains claim storms veer wide of that cape. Dolphins leap there at sunset, as if saluting. In Knossos, artisans cast a modest bronze of Idomeneus, head bowed, helm in hand, standing beside colossal Minos. Younger sailors touch its foot before maiden voyages, murmuring, "Measure every vow twice, the sea collects." And Calabria's vintners, when pressing the year's first grapes, pour a thread of wine onto his tomb. Wind sifts between vine rows, whispering a rhythm half wave crash, half lullaby, as though Orsilochus and Meriones and Idomeneus hum together, a chord that binds fathers to sons, kings to promises, oceans to the debts they are ever ready to call due. At first, the bluff where they buried Idomeneus was merely a wind-scoured hump of limestone, stitched with thyme roots and the bleached husks of sea urchins cast up by winter storms. On the 7th night after the funeral, villagers spotted a small flame dancing there long after lanterns elsewhere had guttered. No torch stood planted, no shepherd lurked. It flickered blue, then green, then vanished, as if inhaled by the dark itself. Some called it foxfire, others the soul of Meriones come to check on his brother. But the oldest crone, she who once mixed wound balms for the stranger king, whispered that Poseidon had struck flint on rock to mark a debt finally balanced. Morning found only a faint circle of scorched lichen, yet the rumour rooted deeper each time it was told, and by midsummer pilgrims were hawking votive shells along the goat path that curled to the summit. Callianira climbed that path alone just after the harvest, when bare vines rattled like dried bones, and the sea lay flat as hammered tin. She brought 3 objects: a coil of freshly spun wool from her youngest daughter's loom, a jar of sweet wine pressed from the year's last sun-black grapes, and a narrow bronze mirror, its back engraved with a bull leaping over waves. She laid wool and wine on the cairn, but held the mirror to her breast, studying her own reflection until tears blurred the image. Idomeneus had traced the ridges of that mirror on their wedding night, promising it would show her true form, even when age attempted deceit. Now the bronze revealed salt-streaked cheeks and eyes emptied of sleep. She set it atop the stones so that it faced seaward, a woman's face turned to water, forever asking where the next storm might blow. In Crete, the news of Idomeneus' death sailed on slow freighters trading tin and purple dye. At first, the Gnossian council responded with stiff silence. Exile, once pronounced, is not easily unsaid, yet famine had eased, and memory, like a drought-broken river, began carving new channels through old judgments. Farmers told of night dreams in which a weather-scarred king walked furrows, fingering wheat heads as though testing their ripeness. Sometimes he stooped to plant a single vine cutting whose leaves unfurled even in dream. When such stories reached the palace, one young scribe copied them into the annals beside inventories of goat fat and lamp wicks. There they fermented until a visiting priest from Delos insisted the ghostly planter was none other than Idomeneus, eager to reconcile with the land he once defended. Crete's new king, Lycastus, convened an assembly. Some elders muttered that conjuring the name of a former ruler would only stir Poseidon's ire anew, yet the tide of sentiment had shifted. The idea of honoring the dead king, publicly, with rites of atonement, offered a kind of relief, as though acknowledging the wound might finally stop the bone-deep ache. Temple stewards reopened the altar on the western cliff, scrubbing away a decade of gull guano, and prepared a hecatomb of black-horn cattle whose hides glimmered like midnight water. They sacrificed at sunrise. No ill omens marred the smoke. Instead, 3 dolphins breached in the bay below, their sleek forms silvered by tilted light, and watchers gasped. Dolphins had not ventured that close to shore since Plague Year. Some claimed the animals carved loops in the cove before vanishing westward, as if escorting a soul across boundary tides. In Calabria, word of these ceremonies reached Callianera through itinerant glass merchants. She gathered her daughters, Eurygone with thoughtful brows, Cleo fierce as flint, and the youngest, Pasiphae, whose laughter skipped like skipping stones, and asked if they wished to see the island their father once ruled. Passage required braving autumn swells, yet the girls, raised on stories of labyrinths and bull leapers, glowed at the prospect. They boarded a broad-keeled freighter laden with wine amphorae, each jar stamped with a tiny seal, a bull's head and a chariot wheel, the unofficial emblem of Calabria's Cretan line. As the prow turned south, Callianera stood at the rail, feeling the ship's pulse under her feet, privately fearing the same waters that had granted and revoked so much of her husband's fate. A week into the voyage, gales shattered the horizon, and sailors shortened sail. Rain sheet battered deck planks until they shone like fresh obsidian. Late night, as lightning shredded clouds, Pasiphae slipped from her bunk, staggered to the gunwale, and stared into boiling dark. A green phosphorescence glowed under each wave crest, jellied fire blown from deep currents. In one flash she swore she saw a pale bull the size of a galley slide beneath the hull, horns glimmering, and for an instant the storm noise muted, replaced by something like a heartbeat magnified. She screamed. Sailors rushed, dragged her back, but she insisted no terror possessed her, only awe. When sailors salted her story with curses at dawn, Callianera listened and thought of foxfire on the bluff, of prophecies shaped like beasts of salt. They reached Knossos on a day washed clean by fresh rain. The harbour bustled. Traders from Egypt hawked linen, Phoenician sailors unloaded cedar, and shepherds herded long-haired sheep down ramps. Yet a hush spread as Callianera stepped ashore. Word leapt from dock to marketplace. The widow of the exile, the daughters of the vow. Palace escorts guided them past frescoed walls, where dolphins cavorted eternally in azure pigment incapable of fading. Lycastus received them in the Megaron, whose rafters still bore smoke from the bull-grease lamps of Minos. He expressed sorrow, offered gifts of saffron and bronze, but Eurygone asked only one thing: to see the stone on which her half-brother Orsilochus had died. Though counsellors balked, the king led them through storerooms into a basilica-like chamber rarely opened, its windows sealed, its floor veined with age. There lay the altar slab, unadorned save for a faint ruddiness, still visible after decades of weather and lichen. Callianera knelt, touched the cold surface, whispering the Cretan word for forgiveness 3 times, until it tasted like crushed olives, bitter, necessary, nourishing. The sisters spent weeks in Knossos, learning dance steps of the labyrinth festival, racing along terraces where once Idomeneus had practiced spear throws. Pasiphae charmed bull leapers with her fearless flips between their training horns. Cleo debated tacticians on phalanx spacing, drawing diagrams in chalk on courtyard flagstones. Eurygone lingered in archives, copying logbooks that listed every ship her father sailed. Local youths flocked to them, dazzled by tales of Calabria's defended walls and vineyards, and soon suitors lined up like ships in a strait. But Callianera sensed the island air was shifting again, a restlessness under ambrosial breezes, as if the god who governs sea paths had rolled over in his tidebed. Her hunch proved prescient. A merchant brig hove to one dusk, sails torn, crew gaunt, delivering grim tidings. Lucanian tribes once thought subdued had returned with new allies, threatening Calabria's coasts. Rumour claimed they sought revenge on the daughters for their father's last victory, fancying the girls' talismans whose capture would break the colony's spirit. Callianera's heart clenched. The daughters were pledged to marry Cretan nobles in spring, but obligations to Calabria's people pulled taut as rigging lines in storm wind. Lycastus offered garrisons. The girls refused, insisting their fate intertwined with the settlers who had trusted their father. Winter gales permitted no immediate passage. During the wait, Callianera dreamt repeatedly of Idomeneus standing at the edge of the same sea bluff, beckoning, not with sorrow, but with a certain rallying calm. In these dreams, he held a helm filled with seawater, insisted she look at her reflection. Each time she did, her face merged with his, until neither could be told apart. Upon waking, she felt more convinced the daughters must return, led if necessary, fight if forced. Lycastus reluctantly released them, gifting a trireme crewed by seasoned men and a cargo of gleaming hoplite panoplies. The sisters poured libations at Orsilochus's altar on departure morning, oil, honey, and the tears of a mother choosing to sail back into storms. The voyage proved swift, too swift, some sailors later said, as though a hidden wind curved around their sails like a guiding palm. But their arrival revealed Calabria ablaze. Smoke furled over orchards, blackening last year's olive leaves. Still, defenders held the city walls, and at sight of the trireme morale surged. The daughters leapt ashore, Cleo barking orders at archers to adjust arrow troughs, Pasiphae racing to stables to ready messenger mounts, Eurygonal organizing water chains to douse burning neighborhoods. That night, Lucanian horns droned from the darkness, but torches on the ramparts bristled in reply. Some swore they saw a seventh signal fire on the distant bluff where Idomeneus lay. No watchpost stood there, yet the flame gyrated, brighter than pine pitch should allow. Battle broke at dawn, a roar of drums and footstamps. Lucanian infantry surged up the dry riverbed, expecting gates to buckle once they set their wave of wicker shields. They met an arrow storm arranged by Cleo. Arrowheads dipped in tar, then lit, so each shaft trailed fire like falling stars. Pasiphae led a cavalry detachment through a hidden ravine, flanking the attackers and scattering them just as they faltered under flames. Eurygone oversaw reserves who leapt from sally ports, spearing panic-stricken foes compressed against rampart foot. By noon, retreat swept through Lucanian lines. By dusk, they fled, leaving shields and boasts in mud. The celebration stretched 3 days, as though wine barrels bottomed out only when new vintage arrived. Yet amid flutes and goat roast, Callianera and her daughters kept a private vigil on the bluff. They carried small lamps, one shaped like a leaping bull, one like a trident, one like a chariot wheel. Setting them among the cairn stones, they spoke aloud the deeds of the living to the dead, believing hills can carry words downward through earth until they reach inner oceans where souls perhaps drift like phosphorescent fish. Months rolled. Calabria's Senate petitioned to rename the colony Idomenia. A marble relief of the king driving a chariot was carved for the forum, helmet low, eyes fixed beyond the frame toward seas, none could capture in stone. Back in Crete, tales of the daughter's defense reached Lycastus. Embassies traded olive oil for Calabrian wine branded with the bull and wheel seal. A maritime route blossomed, and with it, stories. Calabrian sailors claimed that on fog mornings they saw a lone figure pacing the bluff, while Cretan fishermen off Capo Grecale reported dreams of a bronze-clad king striding through underwater ruins teaching cuttlefish how to change shape. Nearly a decade later, Pasiphae, who could vault a bull and land laughing, married a Calabrian craftsman renowned for inlaying silver tendrils into sword pommels. During the ceremony, gulls circled thrice above the bluff, and the sea lay so still. Children wandered knee-deep collecting starfish. Eurigone sailed for Alexandria to study papyrus copying. Her annotated histories of the Trojan War would later guide Alexandrian scholars disputing Homeric catalogues. Clio remained a magistrate, expanding wall-spear ports and founding a yearly games festival where athletes knotted seagrass cords around wrists to honor a king who once gripped oars more than scepters. Callianera, hair streaked with salt white, lived long enough to hold grandsons and granddaughters. On her last evening, she asked to be carried to the bluff at sunset. The sky unfurled apricot and plum, colours her husband used to compare to Cretan walls at dawn. She instructed the grandchildren to scatter goat milk cookies on the cairn for Silicus, who had never tasted them. Wind lifted, smelling of myrtle and distant rain. She told the children how vows can carve chasms, but love plants bridges, perhaps narrow, perhaps swaying in every breeze, yet bridges all the same. Her voice drifted quieter than surf. When twilight drowned the last pink from the sky, she exhaled once as if answering a call none could hear, and was gone. Her pyre sent sparks that flew inland, latching onto memories. A council decree merged the names Calabria and Crete inside festival oaths. Athletes, before each race, still pour salted wine on marble, etched with a bull and a ship keel, invoking the king who steered storms. In Knossos, sailors touch the bronze foot of Idomeneus' statue, then slide 2 fingers along a second one newly installed beside it. Callianera, shawl-wrapped, gaze seaward, eyes carved with silent steel. No plaque explains her right to stand there. Sailors need no reminder that those who hold torches after heroes fall are themselves heroic. And Poseidon? Some say the god made peace when he watched the daughters guard the land their father adopted. Others claim he still circles the bluff on black nights, trident churning green loom beneath the breakers, but his anger has cooled into something more like watchfulness. Occasionally, during spring tides, a bull seal hauls onto the rocks below, bellows once, and slips back. Locals leave it alone, knowing any spear raised against it might stir debts best left settled. 2 full generations later, a philosopher from Athens visited Calabrian Idomenia to debate whether a man can outrun destiny. Guileful students led him to the bluff just before dawn. The philosopher watched violet turn blue, listened to water phase through endless permutations, and concluded that destiny is not a single line, but a web, each strand quivering when another is plucked. The king's vow had plucked one strand. His daughters had tuned others in reply. Perhaps, he told the students, scribbling quadratic thoughts on wax tablets, the highest act of heroism is not the keeping of a vow to gods, but the weaving of the tears that vow leaves behind. Later, travellers reported the philosopher's words to priests at Delphi. The Pythia upon hearing them, laughed, a sound like steam escaping an overfull tripod, and said, "Truth wears many sandals." Those around her did not know whether the god spoke through her, or whether she merely found the story of Idomeneus too rich to fit inside doctrine. What end, then, for a tale born in salt? Some evenings, when the moon glazes the Adriatic with pewter light, fishermen tying nets claim they see two figures atop the bluff, one tall, bearded, armour glinting, the other slighter, ponytail whipping in wind. They pace in tandem, pause at the cairn, then turn seaward. An imagined conversation, perhaps, but if one listens closely through the hush of surf, a rhythm emerges, half wave, half heartbeat, repeating the oldest of Cretan prayers, measure promises, plant vineyards in exile. Let salt water remind you that every triumph leaves a taste of tears. Thus ends the legacy of Idomeneus, not merely a caution, not purely a lament, but a tide-carved testament that vows can slice lives open, yet courage, carried forward by those who remain, can stitch destiny into a shape neither God nor ocean had planned, a shape wide enough for daughters, widows, settlers, and yes, even for an aging king who once loved the sea so fiercely that he wagered his joy upon its mercy. Ajax the Greater, Tower of Bronze, Tragedy of Pride. Broad-shouldered as an oak struck by lightning yet still standing, Ajax, son of Telamon, strode the sands of Troy like a living fortress. Beside nimble Odysseus and swift Achilles, Ajax seemed hewn from the very cliffs of Salamis, all granite sinew and silent resolve. He carried a shield so large it could have roofed a hut. 7 gleaming ox hides layered beneath bronze made it nearly impossible to pierce. Where other heroes sought fame through daring charges, Ajax chose steadiness. He was the immovable post to which Greek hopes were tied when storms of Trojan spears came crashing in. From the first landing of Achaean ships he proved indispensable. When Hector advanced in roaring fury, it was Ajax who met him in single combat beneath the gaze of both armies. Their spears shattered like dried reeds. They closed with swords ringing, shields splintering, dust roiling about their feet. Nightfall ended the duel in stalemate, but on Trojan walls, mothers whispered that only this giant kept Hector from sweeping the Greeks into the sea. For 9 years Ajax held those lines. He rescued stricken comrades, hauled ships from flame, and planted his towering shield where arrows fell like rain. Yet no feast hall thundered with songs of his cunning. That glory poured instead onto Odysseus, whose clever schemes often won louder cheers than Ajax's raw courage. Even so, the giant bore it in silence, until Achilles died and madness grew from grief. With Achilles gone, his divine-wrought armour became a prize to be awarded. Agamemnon and Menelaus declared the chiefs would judge who best deserved it. Ajax, bulwark of shield and spear, or Odysseus, master of ruse and tongue. On the appointed day, Trojan prisoners were asked who had harmed them most. They spoke Odysseus's name, for his stratagem stung unseen. Spies told of counsels swayed by Odysseus's silver words. Ajax's great deeds, glaring and solid, somehow seemed ordinary beside such stories. When the vote fell, the armour of Achilles, symbol of ultimate honour, passed to Odysseus. Something inside Ajax cracked like ice under sudden thaw. That night he left the assembly, jaw clenched, eyes blazing. Hera, ever the weaver of fates, stirred ruin in his mind. At midnight, Ajax crept through the camp, sword raised, intent on slaughtering those who had robbed him. Agamemnon, Menelaus, Odysseus, any who had laughed while he sweated blood before Troy's gates. But Athena, shielding her clever favourite Odysseus, struck Ajax's sight with madness. Where he beheld enemy kings, sheep bleated. He carved through the pens, drenching the sand with animal blood, dragging a ram to his tent and lashing it to a post, believing he had captured Odysseus himself. Dawn revealed carnage and ridicule, the mighty tower reduced to a bloody shepherd, crimson-stained and babbling to carcasses. When sanity returned, shame flooded in like icy tidewater. Warriors he had saved now stared with pity. Some smirked behind hands. Ajax walked beyond the hut to a lonely dune, the roar of surf in his ears. He set his great shield upright in the sand, once an unbreachable wall, and spoke to it softly, as though bidding farewell to an old friend. Then he planted his sword hilt down, point skyward, and fell upon it. Blood darkened the grains at his knees. The sea took the red foam and offered no judgment. Odysseus, though rival and now inheritor of the armour, fought for Ajax's body when Agamemnon hesitated to grant burial rites to the mad. At last the Greeks heaped stones over their fallen giant, forming a cairn that stood like a second shield against time. They whispered that on stormy nights his spirit still stalked the beaches, searching for honour that had slipped through his calloused fingers. Ajax's doom was not cowardice, nor failure in battle, but the silent poison of wounded pride. He reminds every warrior that strength without humility is a fortress whose cracks widen unseen, until the walls can only fall inward. Where his spear once blocked the furious charge, his tail now bars the reckless heart, warning that no shield, no matter how broad, can guard a man from the shadows of his own despair. Philoctetes, the archer of enduring wounds. In the age when God still walked among spearmen and kings, a boy named Philoctetes stood alone beside a blazing pyre on Mount Ota. All others had fled the searing heat of Heracles' poisoned tunic, but the boy's heart would not let the greatest of heroes die unattended. He stacked timbers higher, fanned the flames, and heard Heracles' final cry echo against the cliffs. Out of that furnace came gratitude. The dying hero pressed into the boy's hands his own bow, carved of horn strung with sinew, its quiver packed with arrows steeped in the venom of the hydra. No mortal could bend that bow without shattering bone. Yet in Philoctetes' grasp, it felt as natural as a sparrow to the sky. Thus did a simple act of compassion bind the youth forever to a weapon that could topple kingdoms. Years later, when Helen's abduction summoned the armies of Greece, Philoctetes answered, knowing the bow of Heracles would be needed beneath Troy's walls. Fate intercepted him on the tiny island of Chryse. There, while pouring wine to the gods, he felt a serpent's fangs rake his heel. The bite festered with a rot so foul that sailors gagged at the stench. His fevered screams pierced night after night until the high king Agamemnon grew fearful the gods were already displeased. At dawn, they rowed the writhing archer to barren Lemnos, left him with a few skins of water, and pushed back to sea. Even Odysseus, whose silver tongue could varnish betrayal, murmured apologies that dried in the wind before reaching the abandoned shore. Pain became Philoctetes' constant companion. He learned to splint his own leg with driftwood, to trap gulls that settled too close, to sip rainwater caught in limestone hollows. Some evenings he raged at distant thunder, swearing he would shoot an arrow clear into Olympus. Other nights he wept, cradling the bow like the last thread that kept him from unravelling into madness. Yet he survived, year upon grinding year, until the war he'd been banished from began to stall. Hector lay dead, Achilles buried, and still Troy's gates refused to fall. Then the captive seer Helenus prophesied two necessities. The Greeks must steal Athena's palladium from Troy's heart, and the arrows of Heracles must taste Trojan blood. So Odysseus once more sailed for Lemnos, but not alone. With him came Neoptolemus, son of Achilles, his armour still smelling of the forge, his rage at his father's death not yet cooled. Odysseus urged deception, win the exile's trust, steal the bow, and slip away. Neoptolemus found Philoctetes limping among tide pools, hair knotted, eyes glittering like volcanic glass. The youth spun tales of his own grievances against the Greeks. The two outcasts shared stories until Philoctetes finally unstrung the bow and slept beside a dying fire. Yet when Neoptolemus felt the sacred wood in his hands, guilt flooded him. He woke the archer with trembling words of confession. Rage flared. Philoctetes readied an arrow for the boy's heart, until Odysseus stepped from hiding, shouting of prophecy, of glory, of Greece doomed without this very weapon. The pleas broke like waves against a cliff of bitterness, and still Philoctetes refused. Then the sky brightened with a presence neither mortal nor entirely god, the towering shade of Heracles, limned in blue flame. His voice rolled across Lemnos like thunder wrapped in honey. Endure no longer, Philoctetes. Sail with them. Let my bow finish what my labours began, and healing shall be yours. At that, the archer's anger cooled. He boarded Odysseus's ship, and the first oar-stroke away from Lemnos felt like chains falling from his chest. In the Greek camp, surgeons bathed the wound with herbs and prayers learned from Asclepius. Venom and rot drew out like black snakes, fresh flesh knit beneath divinely guided salve. On the day he stood without crutches, word came that Paris, archer of Troy and spark of the war, swaggered atop the battlements. Philoctetes climbed the low rise, set one of the hydra-tainted shafts to the bowstring, drew until the horn creaked, and released all his years of agony in a single whispering flight. The arrow buried itself in Paris's hip. Poison raced through royal blood as surely as desire once rushed for Helen. Carried into the city, the prince begged healer after healer, but no hand could blunt hydra venom. His dying wails sounded the first cracks in Troy's unbreakable legend. With Paris fallen, Odysseus and Diomedes slipped inside the city under moonless dark and stole the palladium. Philoctetes fired again and again in the final chaos, each shaft another rung on the ladder of Troy's downfall. Yet when the Trojan horse disgorged its hidden warriors, when flames clawed against Priam's palace, Philoctetes did not loot or jeer. He stared through the smoke at the ruins and thought of Lemnos, of gulls, of pain, of the bow growing warm beneath his grip. He had become the hinge on which fate turned, not by ambition, but by endurance. Some say he returned to build a quiet kingdom in Thessaly. Others, that he wandered teaching young hunters, his limp a reminder that every gift bears its scar. But bards agree on this. Sailors rounding Lemnos at night sometimes hear a lone arrow sing across the wind, seeking no target, only release. They say it is Philoctetes, forever loosing the last of his sorrow into the sea. Diomedes, the warrior who challenged gods. In the golden age of heroes, beneath a sky swept clear by war and thunder, there stood a warrior who defied not only mortals but even immortals themselves, Diomedes, king of Argos. His tale begins not with arrogance, but bravery tempered by humility, a rare virtue among men who walked with gods. Diomedes was the son of Tydeus, a fierce hero who himself once marched against the mighty walls of Thebes. His blood carried the fire of courage and loyalty, and under the patient tutelage of his father's memory, Diomedes grew into a soldier both wise and fierce, renowned among all Greeks as second only to Achilles. When the call of war came, a war ignited by the abduction of Helen, the queen whose face launched 1,000 ships, it found Diomedes ready, with the walls of Troy looming before them, the Greeks camped on its vast beaches, each warrior eyeing destiny, honor, or death. It was here, in the dust and blood beneath Troy's unyielding walls, that Diomedes would etch his legend. Early in the Trojan War, Diomedes fought with a courage that lifted the spirits of his comrades. But one fateful day, amid the swirling clash of spears and shields, the goddess Athena herself descended onto the battlefield, shrouded in mist and flame. She came unseen to Diomedes and whispered softly, "Fear nothing, son of Tydeus. Today your eyes shall see as the gods do, and your spear shall strike as theirs strike. But beware, noble warrior, never strike at any deity except Aphrodite, who dares meddle openly among mortal affairs." Empowered by the goddess, Diomedes felt his vision sharpen. He saw gods move unseen among men, saw invisible barriers between mortal and immortal fade away. With new strength and clarity, he surged through the battlefield, cutting down the Trojan ranks as if they were fields of wheat ripe for harvest. Then, through the haze, he glimpsed Aeneas, the noble Trojan prince, fighting valiantly. Diomedes rushed him, spear raised, eyes blazing with divine fury. Their combat shook the earth until, with a swift, powerful thrust, Diomedes wounded Aeneas grievously. As the Trojan prince fell, his mother Aphrodite herself appeared, weeping tears like morning dew, desperate to shield her fallen son from harm. But remembering Athena's words, Diomedes hesitated not. With a fierce cry, he hurled his spear at the goddess herself, slicing Aphrodite's divine wrist. Immortal ichor flowed, shimmering gold upon the earth. The goddess shrieked, a sound both terrible and beautiful, and fled the battlefield, clutching her wound. Never before had a mortal wounded a goddess in open combat, and awe and fear swept across both armies. Yet, even then, Diomedes was not done. From afar, the terrible god Ares, patron of war and slaughter, roared and charged forward in fury, seeking revenge for the dishonor done to Aphrodite. But Diomedes, with courage tempered like steel, turned to face the very incarnation of war itself. With Athena again at his side, Diomedes met Ares blade to blade, mortal against god, courage against rage. Their battle cracked the earth beneath their feet, each blow from the god echoing like thunder. Yet Diomedes stood firm, aided by Athena's subtle strength. Seizing the moment, he lunged forward and pierced Ares, wounding the god deeply. With an anguished roar, Ares retreated from the battlefield, stunned and humiliated, vanishing into the heavens to lick his wounds. Word of Diomedes' deeds spread like wildfire through both Greek and Trojan camps. Mortals watched him in awe. Even the gods respected his valor. His bravery now legendary, he became a beacon of courage, inspiring the Greek armies to press forward with renewed hope and fervor. After the battles, as years of siege dragged on and the war reached its climax, Diomedes remained steadfast. He was a trusted voice of reason among Greek leaders, urging unity and caution even when Achilles sulked in his tent or Agamemnon faltered in his pride. His steady leadership was vital, though often overshadowed by more famous figures. When Troy finally fell, burned and broken, Diomedes took no pleasure in senseless slaughter. He sought no plunder, demanded no slaves, only the safe return home for himself and his weary men. Yet his journey home was marred by tragedy. Poseidon, angered by Diomedes' audacity to wound fellow gods, raised violent storms against him. Tossed and battered by monstrous waves, Diomedes lost men and ships, washing ashore far from home. Eventually, he settled in distant Italy, far from his beloved Argos. There, weary yet proud, he built new cities, sharing stories of gods and heroes beneath foreign stars. The legend of Diomedes, the mortal who wounded the gods, endured through generations, not because of reckless bravado, but for the rare blend of valor, honor, and humility he embodied. His life showed mortals could rise to touch even the divine, yet reminded them always of the price such audacity demanded. So ended the tale of Diomedes, warrior king of Argos, whose legacy was carved not only in the shields and spears of men, but in the immortal flesh of gods themselves. Even as he passed from life into legend, his story whispered through the ages, echoing one timeless truth. True heroes are not those who seek immortality, but those whose courage earns it. Amphiaraus, the seer who rode into the earth. Long before the gates of Thebes rattled beneath bronze-shod hooves, there lived in Argos a man who saw farther than any oracle and fought with a blade guided by prophecy. His name was Amphiaraus, son of Oikles, descended from Olympus the truth speaker, and in his breast beat two hearts, one of a warrior, eager for valor, and one of a prophet, burdened by the knowledge of how every valorous tale must end. Whole kingdoms trusted his counsel, for the gods placed no veil before his eyes. Yet it was those unblinking eyes that doomed him when loyalty clashed with fate. Argos prospered under King Adrastus, and Amphiaraus shared power as both kinsman and counselor. Peace might have endured had exile not come knocking in the guise of Polydeuces, son of blind Oedipus. Clutching a torn cloak and a story of treachery, Polydeuces begged Adrastus to help him reclaim Thebes from his brother Eteocles. Adrastus, bound by hospitality, swore to restore the exiled prince. At the banquet that followed, goblets rang with warlike promise, and Amphiaraus alone sat silent, watching the fire pits paint the ceiling red as spilled blood. In prophetic trance, he saw 7 great captains marching against 7 gates, but also rivers of Argive lifeblood soaking the Ismenus plain, saw spears snapped like reeds, saw himself swallowed by a rent in the earth while thunder split the sky. The vision chilled him, and he swore he would never join a war already written in ashes. Yet prophecy rarely bends to will, and treachery often wields a subtler spear. Among the feasters reclined Eurypyle, Amphiaraus' own wife, and Adrastus' cherished sister. Her beauty was rivaled only by her hunger for bright treasures. Polynices knew this and laid across her lap the necklace of Harmonia, a chain hammered by Hephaestus, cursed to sow discord with every gleam. When Eurypyle's fingers closed around the gemstones, their fire reflected in her eyes, and she promised to settle her husband's refusal. That night she pressed against Amphiaraus and spoke honeyed words turned sharp at the core. If he denied Adrastus, he denied her family honor. Cornered between love and doom, the seer warrior yielded, but before he buckled his cuirass, he drew his young sons Alcmaeon and Amphilocus close and whispered a grim bequest. When you are grown, avenge your father upon this necklace and upon the mother who bartered my life. So the 7 set forth, the towering Tydeus, fiery Capaneus, proud Polyphontes, mighty Hippomedon, daring Parthenopaeus, Polynices himself, and riding last beneath a cloud of foreknowledge, Amphiaraus. All Argos thundered in their wake, shields ringing like iron rain, At every campfire, Adrastus begged his seer for a sign of victory. Amphiaraus answered only with downcast eyes and the silence of tombs not yet dug. Before Thebes they arrayed beneath high battlements. Capaneus swore by his own strength he would scale the walls even if Zeus hurled lightning. Tydeus foamed for single combat. The Thebans manned towers with grim resolve. Amphiaraus lingered beside a trench freshly dug for siege engines and traced patterns in the dust, each line a thread of fate he could not cut. When dawn bled red over the plain, horns blared, and the 7 charged each to his appointed gate. At first, the Argive assault roared like a lion unchained. Capaneus indeed mounted the parapets, only for Zeus to smite him lifeless with a white-hot bolt, proving pride's perish price. Tydeus slew 50 men before falling to a javelin. Hippomedon drowned in a flood of defenders. Polynices and Eteocles speared each other beneath the Cadmea's shadow, twin curses fulfilled. Everywhere prophecy blossomed in blood, and Amphiaraus saw each unfolding petal with excruciating clarity. The moment of his own doom arrived not by sword, but by the skyquake of Zeus himself. As Amphiaraus turned his chariot to flee the collapsing lines, more from duty to carry word home than from fear, he felt the air electrify. Thunder cracked. The earth yawned wide like a beast maw before his horses. Some say Zeus opened that chasm to save his favourite seer from a dishonourable spear in the back. Others that Hades claimed the truth speaker for his own counsel. Either way, the ground split, swallowing horses, chariot and rider in a single trembling inhalation. Argive spearmen watching from afar saw only dust settling where moments before their talisman had stood. No body was left, no armour, no blood, only a scar in the soil, as though the world had sealed an oath. Back in Argos, word of the slaughter came on staggering messengers. Eurypyle clasped her gleaming necklace, yet found its jewels had lost their lustre beneath rumours of her treachery. In time, Alcmaeon fulfilled his father's whisper. He slew his own mother, loosed the curse fully, and the land itself hounded him until madness drove him to seek purification far from home. Even Adrastus, the well-meaning king, wandered broken-hearted until death. Thebes would fall years later under the sons of the 7, yet victory tasted of ash. No songs could drown out the echo of Amphiaraus' disappearing wheels. Long afterward, travellers claimed a spring rose where the chasm first opened, waters clear enough to mirror the future. A temple sprang up around it, and the oracle of Amphiaraus rivaled Delphi itself. Suppliants lay upon ramskins by night, dreaming answers carried on whispering hooves. Some awoke cured of ailments, others burdened with knowledge they could neither outrun nor forget. For the seer who could not flee his fate, now guided strangers through theirs, his voice seeping from the ground he vanished into, gentle as rain, yet heavy with the weight of truth. Thus ends the tale of Amphiaraus, warrior of reluctant courage, prophet of relentless vision, a man who rode unwillingly toward the one doom no foresight could avoid, his own. He reminds us that seeing the path does not always grant power to change it, and that sometimes the earth itself claims those who understand its deepest tremors too well. Neoptolemus, heir in blood and ash. Neoptolemus first knew his father as a shadow flickering on bronze. Stories whispered at dusk, a godlike figure called Achilles, who strode Troy's plains and bent fate to his heel. On the green isle of Scyros the boy, named Pyrrhus for the copper fire of his hair, spent mornings wrestling cliff-edge winds and afternoons hurling spears at gulls that veered too close. his mother Diademea tried to wrap him in music and mild pursuits, but greatness dogged him like a hunting hound, tugging at every quiet hour. When the war in the east dragged through its 10th weary summer, and Hector lay cold while Troy still stood, a prophecy crawled from the lips of the captured seer Helenus. The city will not fall unless Achilles' son comes to the field. So Odysseus sailed to Scyros under a white sail trimmed with necessity. He found the youth sparring 2 older islanders at once, laughter bright as sword flashes. Odysseus offered no florid speech, only a bronze spear once hefted by Achilles, and a truth too heavy to refuse. Pyrrhus stood silent, running calloused fingers over the weapon's biting edge, and in that heartbeat the boy shed his island name. Neoptolemus was born. Across the open sea he learned the taste of legacy, salt mixed with the copper of self-bitten lips as he balanced on the prow, imagining Trojan battlements like shark fins on the horizon. The Greek camp greeted him with first awe, then unease, a living echo of their fallen champion, yet untested. Agamemnon's war-weary host looked into those flame-bright curls and saw both hope and reminder of how tragically far heroes could fall. Neoptolemus accepted the unease, like poorly fitted greaves, an irritation, not a barrier. His trial by fire came the night the wooden horse rolled to Troy's gates. While older generals sweated over strategy, Neoptolemus sharpened a short sword, the whetstone hiss stoking the furnace inside his ribs. Crammed within timber ribs, he waited among jostling breath and whispered prayers until Troy's jubilant torches died down and Sinon's signal flared. Then the hatch yawned into midnight, and Neoptolemus tumbled into legend. He moved through darkened corridors like a spark through dry grass, fast, hungry, leaving scorched ruin in his wake. Where stalwart Ajax had once hammered and Odysseus schemed, the newcomer simply cut. Pillars dripped red. Startled sentries died before voices could rise. The act that sealed his name came at the altar of Zeus in Priam's courtyard. The ancient king, hair silvered by sorrow, clung to the god's marble knees as flames licked through cedar beams. Neoptolemus seized him by the thin wrist, yanked him clear of sanctuary, and drove bronze between ribs that had borne the weight of 2 generations of war. Some watched aghast. The brutality seemed to crack the very order of things. Yet in Neoptolemus's eyes burned a colder light. Legacy demanded a thunderclap to mark the end of Troy, and he simply supplied it. Morning revealed smouldering ruins, and a young conqueror already wearing the tightening chains of reputation. Hecuba's scream still hung in smoke, when Neoptolemus obeyed another grim directive. Hurl Astyanax, Hector's infant son, from the battlements lest revenge bloom anew. Even Myrmidons, who had followed Achilles through rivers of gore, felt the chill of that order. Neoptolemus carried it out with jaw set. Afterward, as dawn smeared pink across crushed towers, he rinsed hands in the Scamander's soot-flecked current and wondered, in a fleeting private ache, whether rivers ever forgot what they carried. With Troy's fall, spoils were divided like carcass to scavengers. Neoptolemus claimed Andromache, widow of Hector, less from lust than a dark symmetry. Achilles had slain Hector. The son would bind the hero's household to his own. Odysseus gifted him the prophet Helenus as counselor, ensuring the youth's new household would forever echo with Trojan tongues. Ships laden with plunder turned west, but Poseidon, still smarting from Greeks' arrogance, racked their voyage with storms. At Epirus in Epirus, Neoptolemus beached his battered ships and forged a small empire from wilderness, Andromache at his side steering survivors into farms, walls, marketplaces. Troy reborn in miniature on barbarian shores. Peace sat ill on shoulders honed for war, and soon fresh ambition whispered. Neoptolemus sailed for Delphi, intent on demanding satisfaction from Apollo for guiding Paris's arrow to Achilles' heel. The god's priest counselled humility. The young king bristled. Accounts diverge. Some claim he threatened to raise the sanctuary. Others that a quarrel over sacrificial precedents erupted into bloodshed. All agree on the end. Amid marble porticos, Neoptolemus fell beneath a flurry of blows, either priestly knives or the vengeful blade of Orestes, who sought both the same sacrificial honours and the hand of Hermione, daughter of Menelaus, whom Neoptolemus had already claimed. Thus prophecy circled back. Achilles' killer was Apollo's arrow. Achilles' son died at Apollo's shrine. Far away, Andromache received word with a silence that rang louder than lament. She oversaw the burial rites, folding Trojan hymns into Greek dirges, and raised their son Molossus with a gentler steel than war had granted his father. Helenus kept counsel by her side. Together, they tended a kingdom that survived not by the fire of conquest, but the slower root work of fields and treaties. Travellers in later centuries swore the courts of Epirus housed a spear once wielded by Achilles' heir, its point blackened, its shaft wrapped in red cloth, to honour blood both shed and spilled. It hung high yet untouchable, a reminder that rage can topple walls, but seldom builds hearths. Where Achilles embodied swift-footed wrath, Neoptolemus stands as warning that inheritance without temperance becomes wildfire. His victories were undeniable. So were the shadows they cast. Every arrow loosed by younger heroes carried a whisper of his name, an admonition that glory scorches quickest those who seize it hottest. And in Delphi's sacred silence, where laurel leaves still rustle like distant applause, some claim the wind forms a single flaring syllable, Pyrrhus, before dying among the stones. Antilochus, sprint toward the sun, step into legend. Before the first scar of war creased his skin, Antilochus could already outrun seabirds skimming the foam-flecked surf of Pylos. Fishermen hauling nets at dawn would pause, mouths agape, as the prince flashed past with sunlight tangled in his hair, heels barely kissing wet sand. From the palace balcony, old King Nestor leaned on a railing carved with stories of his own youth, and whispered to courtiers that speed was only half his son's gift. The greater half was the heart that powered it. Yet even a father famed for counsel could not predict how swiftly that heart would burn itself out. Antilochus's schooling came as much from stable dust as from scrolls. He learned the fine art of hitching chariot traces so they never twisted, memorized every tendon of the dun-coated mares Poseidon once gifted Nestor, and practiced the sacred patience of a driver who turns terror into precision. At night the boy and the king sat near a hearth sputtering olives and pine, and Nestor recounted the battle of Pylos against the Epeans, the heady gallops of his youth, the cost of every friend lost. Antilochus listened with eyes bright as fresh-coined bronze, understanding that speed alone could not outrun sorrow. When Menelaus called all Greece to avenge Helen, Nestor, though grey as winter reeds, readied his contingent. Antilochus threw himself before the old man's sandal straps and begged to sail. "I have spent my breath chasing gulls," he said. "Let me chase glory beside you." Nestor relented after a night spent pacing colonnades of memories. He assigned the boy command of Pylian charioteers, hoping reins and responsibility might temper reckless ardor. Across the sea, Antilochus first laid eyes on Troy, walls blazing gold under Anatolian sun, banners snapping like dragon scales. On the battlefield, he proved storm-swift, yet never untethered from discipline. When Odysseus needed a messenger to dart between phalanx knots, Antilochus wove his team through showers of arrows, leather cheek guard flapping like a swallow's wing. He ferried wounded Machaon from the killing field, steering with knees while binding the surgeon's gashed thigh mid-gallop. Word spread. Nestor's colt outraces even death's black mares. His closest bond beyond his father was with Patroclus, Achilles' gentle thundercloud. They shared bread, jests, and the queasy awe of seeing Achilles sulk, while the war creaked under his absence. When Patroclus donned the famous armour and charged to save burning ships, Antilochus clasped his forearm in farewell, but secretly feared dawn would break without him. Fears proved prophets. Patroclus fell beneath Trojan spears, and Antilochus had to bear the news to Achilles. The sprint from skirmish line to Myrmidon camp felt interminable. Each step drummed grief deeper. Achilles staggered. Fistful of ash poured over lion-bright hair and tore at the earth. Antilochus held him silent until sorrow's gale eased enough to shape into vengeance. After Hector's death, the Greeks honoured Achilles with funeral games. The chariot race drew every hero whose pulse beat in time with pounding hooves. Diomedes boasted horses plucked from Aeneas after the Aeneid's father barely escaped a burning stockyard. Menelaus trusted twin stallions of Spartan lineage. Antilochus had his lean pillion mares, lighter, hungrier, fierce as strays in winter. The turning post lay at the far end of a tight half-moon track churned into dust. As wheels cracked the start line, Antilochus tucked reins under thumb and let instinct slip its collar. Diomedes quickly claimed the front. Menelaus boxed Antilochus to the outside. At the final curve, with the track narrowing to a blade's width, he gauged both distance and risk in one spark of thought: bend inside or lose. He whispered to his mares, yanked the left rein, and sliced between post and rival axle by a finger breadth, spray of dust marking his reckless artistry. Menelaus veered wide to avoid collision, shouting curses swallowed by wind. Antilochus crossed second behind Diomedes, but when Menelaus accused him before Achilles of unfair driving, the youth stepped forward, head bowed, offering his prize tripod in restitution. Menelaus, moved by humility that equaled courage, returned the gift and proclaimed Antilochus the swiftest soul alive save for Hermes himself. Yet the gods sharpened sacrifice from pride. During one brutal sortie, the aged Nestor, sturdy heart now betraying brittle limbs, found himself stranded as Trojan chariots wheeled close. Antilochus saw his father's crest totter like a ship's mast in storm. He spurred his mares, eyes narrowing to sheer purpose. A spear flashed toward Nestor's exposed side. Antilochus vaulted from his own chariot, shield up, intercepting iron meant for the old king. The blade slammed through bronze, tearing flesh just below the collar. He still pushed Nestor onto his own chariot deck, jammed the reins into the elder's blood-slick palms, and slapped the horses. Another spear, this one hurled by Memnon, shining son of Eos, found Antilochus's chest. The world muted to muffled surf. Dust motes hung like constellations. He fell, knowing his speed had at last outrun destiny, but only by one heartbeat. Nestor's wail split the clangor on that field, ancient grief no younger throat could match. Achilles wept again, for the cost of friendship echoed in fresh form. They burned Antilochus on a separate pyre beside Patroclus, twin pillars of smoke twisting into the same sky. Achilles cut a lock of hair, letting it drift on the updraft. Nestor stood long after ashes cooled, whispering to winds he could not outrun. My son shortened his stride so mine could lengthen. In time, poets carried Antilochus's name on reed-pipe nights from Ionia to Sicily. Runners at the Panathenaic Games poured honey onto starting lines in his honour, hoping feet would taste his memory and fly. Mariners leaving Pylos set small wooden chariots adrift, tiny wheels spun by waves, praying for swift currents. And every father who trained a child to ride fast also taught, speed untempered blurs trophies, speed given freely saves kingdoms. Thus Antilochus endures less as a comet's tale of glittering triumph, and more as a sunrise, brief, brilliant, but ushering deeds brighter than itself. He reminds each quick-footed dreamer that true racecraft isn't winning before others arrive. It's reaching back, mid-stride, to lift those who taught you how to run. Castor and Polydeuces, twin flames who rode the earth by day and ruled the stars by night. Twin eggs once rested in a hollow of Spartan rushes, their chalky shells warm beneath the breath of early spring. A shepherd discovered them first, thinking some monstrous swan had strayed inland from Euripides marshes. But when he brushed straw aside, light flared within, as if the yolk itself were dawn. Then the shell split, and two infants blinked at a world they would soon bend toward legend. One bore a mortal pulse, the other a flicker of Zeus's own lightning, for their mother Leda had known both the white-winged god, who drifted to her in swan form, and her mortal husband Tyndareus, on the same moon-steeped night. Thus Castor entered life wrapped in clay's frailty, while Polydeuces, or Pollux to Latin tongues, throbbed with a half-divine glow. They grew beneath Laconian sun, running the palace colonnades with their sisters Helen and Clytemnestra, kicking olive pits like dice, laughing at tutors who struggled to cage twin tempests. By 12, they had already mastered every chariot trick known south of Taygetus. Castor could turn a 4-horse team so tight the outside wheel brushed a boundary stone without spilling a grain of sand. Polydeuces could vault from the platform, box an opponent senseless, and land back on the reins as though the air itself had set a step for him. Word travelled in the dusty wake of traders. Sparta housed 2 youths, whose combined gifts might rival even Heracles. That rumour reached Jason, as he fashioned a cedar keel for a ship he would name Argo. He sent an iron-clasped scroll inviting the Dioscuri to join the quest for the Golden Fleece. The twins arrived at Iolcus just as dawn combed bronze through the harbour, leading stallions so sleek even Argonaut veterans paused mid-oath. On deck, Orpheus plucked his lyre. The horses whinnied in counter-melody, and Castor grinned at a future already humming with song. Many nights on black water knitted the brothers into the heartbeat of the crew. When the Argo lodged beneath cold, dark clouds and a gale whipped her mast, it was Polydeuces who scaled rigging to wrestle canvas, while lightning hissed a hair's breadth from his knuckles, Zeus's son answering storm with stormless calm. When the clashing rocks threatened to pulp ship and soul, Castor lashed oar handles to the gunwales in a lattice that braced timbers against the crushing tide. The Argo slipped through on a seam of grace that smelled of pine tar and raw courage. Afterward, sailors whispered that 2 constellations had glimmered briefly above the prow, twin flames guiding them home. But the sea is only one kind of proving ground. Years later, after the fleece had exchanged hands and taverns echoed with Argonaut boasts, the Dioscuri faced a challenge closer to Spartan soil. Their cousin Theseus, charmed by young Helen's beauty, carried her off to Attica while she spun garlands in a courtyard. Castor's face froze to hammered bronze. Polydeuces' fists closed like drawstring purses. They rallied a war band, thundered across Isthmian scrub, and stormed Aphidnae's citadel. Helen hurried into Castor's arms, but before they turned homeward, the twins left piles of broken spear shafts as a warning etched in cedar splinters. Sparta's flowers are thorned. Their reputation soared, and so did desire for them. The Leucippid maidens, Phoebe and Hilaria, promised to the Messenian cousins Idas and Lynceus, met the Dioscuri during a festival bright with lyres and new wine. Eyes locked, pulses tangled, and soon the twins swept the brides away in a thunder of hooves toward Therapne's hilltop temple. Idas and Lynceus fumed, swore vengeance, and raised a pursuit that crackled like summer lightning across the Spartan plain. The clash unfolded at Amphiaraus' cattle pens, where dust plumes curled around lowing herds. Castor, mortal sinew taut with anticipation, crouched behind an oak trunk, ready to unhorse Lynceus, while Polydeuces grappled Idas amid snorting steers. Yet destiny is written on both parchment and pulse. Lynceus's keen eyesight, sharper than any hawk, spotted Castor's ambush. A spear flew, iron bit mortal flesh. Castor fell, clutching reddening dust, eyes wide not with fear, but with stunned disbelief that the world could shut so quickly. Polydeuces saw the fall through blur of rage and split Idas' skull with a fist that cracked like thunder, then chased Lynceus across the field and buried spear through spine. Triumph tasted of iron and ash. Dropping to his knees beside the dying brother, Polydeuces pressed hands to the wound as though sheer will could mend torn life. Castor managed a half smile. "Brother," he whispered, "share the dawns we dreamed." Grief propelled Polydeuces skyward. He called on Zeus across vibrating air. "Father, grant me half my immortality no longer. Let Castor live again, or let me die beside him." Clouds roiled into marble pillars. Thunder answered. Zeus appeared as horizon-wide brilliance, offering a compromise braided from paradox. The twins could alternate days, one breathing Olympus's ambrosia, while the other tasted Hades' twilight, or together dwell among the stars, guiding sailors with twin beacons. They chose both at once, sharing divinity like a wine cup passed hand to hand, yet also accepting the constellation that would keep their outlines stitched into night's tapestry. So Castor and Polydeuces rose beyond mortality's ledger. When winter storms clawed at Aegean decks, frightened mariners watched St. Elmo's twin fires flicker on mastheads and knew the Dioscuri patrolled the squall. Horse tamers in Thessaly still murmur prayers to Castor before fitting bridles. Pancration boxers in Arcadia trace Polydeuces' sigil, a downward fist inside a circle, onto dusty skin. And lovers everywhere recall the Leucippid brides, telling each other that passion may kindle wars, but fidelity can tether even a god to mortal heartbeat. Sometimes under Spartan moonlight, shepherds claim to see two phantom stallions gallop across the Taygetos ridge, one white as fresh marble, one dark as glistening obsidian. Their hoofbeats leave no mark, yet olive branches sway in their wake, and the air trembles with a harmony only twin souls could weave. If you listen closely, you might discern language in that rhythm, an echo of a pack stronger than sinew, wiser than gods. Not even death shall unsolder the link between those born as two halves of one unbroken surge of life. Pandion II, king in exile, father of a future Athens. Pandion's cradle was carved from olive wood so old it whispered the sap songs of Attica's first groves. Nurses swore the infant grasped at torchlight as if already trying to seize destiny. But destiny seldom takes an easy shape. His father, the just King Erechtheus, ruled a thriving Athens until the day a jealous kinsman named Metion stirred whispers through the marble colonnades. Where Erechtheus farmed loyalty, Metion sowed doubt. Why trust a single line when many could guide the city's fate? Those murmurs grew teeth. One storm-lashed night, Metion's sons stormed the palace. By sunrise, they held the Acropolis, and young Pandion II, barely old enough to trace characters in lamp-black, rode away under cloak and thunder, clutching a keepsake seal ring, while his sisters wailed behind shuttered windows. Exile carried him west to Megara, where King Pilus welcomed the dispossessed prince partly out of pity, partly from fear of drawing Athens' wrath should the rightful heir ever return. In Pilus's granite hall, Pandion learned to read men the way pilots read stars, silent, steady, looking for the faintest shift before plotting course. He married Pylia, the king's amber-eyed daughter, whose voice could still a feast hall with a single soft word. Over time, their union yielded 4 sons: Aegeus, quick-minded and restless; Pallas, keen of spear; Nisos, born with a lock of purple hair that legends already claimed held his life; and Lycus, brooding, given to dusk-long vigils on the sea wall. Pandion would pace the ramparts after them, teaching how to gauge wind by gull tilt, but his gaze always drifted eastward across the Saronic Gulf, where Athens gleamed beyond reach like a still unstrung lyre. Years scrolled by like parchment unrolling. Pandion served loyally under his father-in-law until Pilus, racked by guilt for an old blood crime, voluntarily exiled himself to the Peloponnese, yielding Megara's throne to the Athenian prince. Pandion accepted the diadem with measured grace, ruling a port city that thrummed with cedar-scented shipwrights and bronze bell laughter. Yet every law he signed, every harbour-side festival he blessed, felt like shorthand for the vow brewing in his sons' chests. We will reclaim what was stolen. By the boy's 20th year, the pledge hardened. Sailors from Attica carried tales of Metion's heirs squandering coffers, letting harvest terraces erode while temples cracked for want of care. Aegeus cursed across the banquet board, "They starve Athena of worship." Even Pallas, usually fire-sure, spoke with slow heat. A city so sick yearns for its rightful blood. Pandion listened, pulse hammering beneath practiced calm. He remembered Erechtheus's last hug, the shock of exile's cold. His voice at last: "Athens must be healed, but not by reckless nightblades. Win hearts first, then walls will open like gates to sunrise." He spent months drafting letters on lambskin, sending envoys disguised as traders to seed dissent, to remind old allies of Erechtheus's steady hand. Rumour sprouted rebellion as quietly as violets under snow. But time, the champion no mortal defeats, began to lean on Pandion's shoulders. Grey crept through his beard. Sea fog settled in his joints. One sunset, he climbed Megara's Acropolis alone, sealing a small chest that held the olive-wood cradle slat and Erechtheus's seal ring. He set it before Aegeus and whispered, "Your birthright weighs heavier than bronze. Bear it well." Shortly after, a final fever swept him beyond mortal reckonings. As funeral pyres crackled, gulls circled in an eerily perfect square, wings catching flame glow like burnished shields. Courtiers swore it was a sign the gods allotted Pandion a hero's afterlife among the constellations, or perhaps a preview of Phalanx order his son soon would need. Grief turned to iron. The brothers forged alliances, Megarian hoplites eager for plunder, Arcadian bow levies bargaining for Attic farmland, and a few covert Athenians tired of Meteanid misrule. Under moonless sky, they rowed across the gulf in silent triremes, cutting through black water where Pandion's reflection no longer haunted them. At dawn, their prows kissed the beaches below Piraeus. Local farmers, alerted by cryptic tokens Pandion had arranged, rose with scythes and ox goads, swelling the landing party's ranks. The coup that reclaimed Athens lasted 3 days. Metean's line, drunk on complacency, found storehouses empty of loyal guards. Aegeus led the central push-up Oreopagus hill. Pallas flanked through the marketplace. Nisos secured the main gate, and Lycus slipped into the treasury, seizing ledgers that proved the usurper's corruption. By the third evening, olive oil lamps lined every street in triumphant blaze as citizens shouted Pandion's name, though his body slept in Megara's tomb. On the Acropolis they crowned Aegeus king. Before oak-carved idols the brothers poured libations of honeyed wine, promising to rule as their father had wanted. Wisdom over vanity, civic duty over family pride. In Megara, Pylia ordered a hero shrine built beside Pandion's burial mound. Sailors reported that in certain lights a white-winged bird, sea eagle or perhaps some rarer messenger, circled the shrine at dusk, crying a note eerily akin to a trumpet's first call. They said if you listened harder, you could hear a second tone under the shrill, almost like a father's proud laughter watching sons turn promise into city walls. And Athens did heal. Aegeus fostered the arts. Pallas organized militias into disciplined phalanxes. Nisos returned to Megara to rule there under a peace treaty. Lycus dedicated new altars to Demeter on Eleusinian fields. Within a generation the city blossomed so vigorously that even distant oracle keepers noted its sudden vigor in their scrolls. Most ordinary folk, grinding barley or mending nets, never spoke Pandion's name, yet they walked streets paved by consequences he set in motion. Proof that some heroes wield patience sharper than any sword. Legends reckon little with subtlety. Pandion II is less amphitheatre thunder than quiet seed planter, but without him there is no Aegis to sire Theseus, no navy-girded Athens to challenge Persia, no Parthenon kissing blue heaven. His greatness lies in endurance, the slow burn of rightful purpose carried through exile, taught to heirs, released like arrows only when the bowstring of timing drew taut. And though the Acropolis air now hums with languages he never knew, evening swallows still ride updrafts around that sacred rock. In their spiral, keen-eyed observes claim to see the faint outline of a ghostly olive-wood cradle, rocking gently on the wind. Euphemus, water-walker of the Argonauts. Euphemus first sensed the sea as more than shifting blue when he was barely tall enough to grip a trident shaft. On the wind-sleeked beaches of Tenerum, he would race the tide, toes skimming foam, until older boys called him dolphin-blooded. They were not far wrong. His father was Poseidon, and salt whispered through his veins like a second heartbeat. One dawn he discovered that, sprinting across an ebbing sandbar, he did not sink. The water firmed beneath his soles, quivering but solid, until awe broke his stride and plunged him knee-deep. Poseidon's hush in the boy's ear was simple. Run again and believe. Euphemus learned that morning to trust momentum more than gravity. His feet could blur across waves faster than gulls could reckon. By the time Jason called Greece's bravest to build a ship stout enough for danger and dreams, Euphemus's name already drifted from harbour to harbour. The man who leaves no footprints when the surf is highest. At Iolcus, he found the Argo gleaming like freshly roused dawn. Her prow, carved from prophetic oak, spoke in knotted whispers that only a few could hear. To Euphemus, it throbbed with promise. He welcomed Heracles' thunderous handshake, Orpheus's cultured nod, Atalanta's measuring gaze, all curious if rumour outstripped flesh. He answered by stepping off the quay onto the harbour's ripples, pacing the length of the anchored ship as though strolling a polished deck, then vaulting aboard with a grin broad as whitecaps. Even hard-eyed warriors laughed, tension eased by that miraculous jaunt. The voyage east was a mosaic of marvels and dread. When Lemnos's perfumed island tried to drown the crew in honeyed indolence, Euphemus felt the undertow of their trance. Unable to watch heroes rust in luxury, he sprinted across the bay's mirrored hush, circling the Argo on water until Jason's shame woke like a kicked fire. At Cyzicus, he used that same gift to ferry messages between storm-scattered comrades in pitch-black night, skimming white-crested breakers unseen by hostile eyes. Yet his valour shone brightest at the clashing rocks. As the Symplegades reared to pulverize the ship, Argus's oars faltered. Jason loosed a dove. The bird slipped through, clipped but alive. Yet crewmen hesitated. Euphemus vaulted onto a frothing crest, sprinting ahead of the Argo, shouting back the rhythm of the narrowing gap. Trusting his footfalls as celestial metronome, rowers dug hard. The Argo tore through as stone teeth slammed shut behind, shaving splinters from the stern, while Euphemus leapt the widening chasm and landed laughing on deck, hair salted white by spray. In Colchis, Poseidon's son was not centre stage. Medea's sorcery and Jason's quest eclipsed lesser lights. But Euphemus watched, wary, when Absyrtus's fleet pursued their stolen fleece. South of Crete, as bronze giant Talos hurled boulders, he again became courier, dashing round the rocking hull to knot lines, untie snarled rigging, steadying sailors whose nerve washed away like sand from a bucket. Each evening, Orpheus's lyre gilded the bruised skies, but Euphemus found deeper comfort kneeling at the gunwale, fingertips trailing wake, deciphering the sea's shifting moods, the only voice he trusted beyond his own heartbeat. Near Libya, Poseidon's will surfaced in the brutish form of dehydration and sand. A desert wind drove the Argo ashore far from any inlet, leaving timbers creaking on dunes. Days blurred, heat mirage, blistered souls hauling the ship upon log rollers, prayers to any god who might still care. At the brink of collapse, they reached Tritonis, an inland lagoon shining like spilled mercury amid salt pan glare. No fresh water eased the sailors' cracked lips. Tritonis was brackish and guarded by the enigmatic god Triton himself. He rose, green-skinned and crested, eyes old as continental shift. Only those of sea blood dared meet his stare, and Euphemus stepped forward, palms spread in greeting. Triton's voice poured like undertow. "Give me token of fellowship, and I will show you out." Jason offered a bronze tripod. Triton accepted, then scooped the lagoon sand into Euphemus's cupped hands. A clod of wet earth, cool and heavy. "Keep this," he intoned. "One day, cast it where the prophecy leads, and your children will rule the waves." Euphemus felt power thrum in those grains, a future compressed into muddy weight. He tucked it into a beeswax-lined pouch at his belt, sensing the pulse of unborn islands. Years later, long after the fleece glittered on temples back home, the Argonauts dispersed like fireflies at dawn. Euphemus settled in Taenarum again, but restlessness prowled him. He married the nymph Leonome. Yet his nights quivered with visions of an island rising from sea foam, of descendants speaking tongue-twisted Doric, of dolphins escorting colonists under moon-glazed sails. A more pragmatic hero might have dismissed such dreams, but Euphemus knew the sea rarely lied to its son, so he outfitted a slim ship, lashed oars of ash, and invited navigators whose eyes still gleamed with Argonaut hunger. They skirted the Peloponnese, west into Ionian wildness, storm-dodging for days until a gale shredded mast and courage alike. Near drowning, they beached at Thera, a crescent of volcanic rock haunted by goat herders and sulphur stench. Despair clung like sodden wool, but as Euphemus stumbled across black sand, the pouch at his belt burst. Tritonous earth spilled, seeping into pumice-rich soil. Instantly the wind lulled, the surf calmed, and gulls circled as though welcoming kin. The island pulsed with possibility. He remembered Triton's promise. Cast the clod where prophecy leads. Here, in a wasteland none coveted, destiny rooted, Euphemus never witnessed the full bloom. He died on Thera after founding crude wells, teaching locals to set nets in turquoise calderas. Yet generations after, his great-grandson sailed south, carrying familial lore of an ancestor who ran on water, and colonized Cyrene in Libya, exactly where Triton once stood. They claimed dominion over fertile coastline, their coins stamped with a sprinting youth above stylized waves, a silent nod to the man who outran the sea's surface. Legends about Euphemus persisted at Delos, Delphi, and harbours, where fishermen swear that on starlit nights, when currents sleep, a lone figure can be glimpsed jogging the mirrored Aegean. No ripple trails him, only the hush of bare feet tapping water like soft drums. Some say he patrols for sailors lost in storm-tumbled dark, guiding them to shoals where reeds rustle lullabies. Others believe he chases an ever-retreating horizon, tasting spray forever new. One thing all tales share. Wherever Euphemus's memory glides, the waves seem humbled, as if honouring a pact struck long ago between a god and the swift-footed child who dared trust impossible ground. Iolaus, the flame beside the lion. Iolaus was born under a crescent moon that silver washed the tiles of Thebes and stitched silver lace along every spear in the palace armory. His father, Iphicles, could boast a respectable record in skirmishes along the isthmus. His mother, Medusa, sang lullabies said to descend from Danae herself. Yet the infant's first wonder was not a warrior's shield, but the spring-driven toy cart an old nurse carved for him. He watched its wheels entranced until the candle guttered. By 7, he was dismantling household locks simply to see the clever dance of tumblers. By 12, he could braid a 14-strand leather rein that never twisted under strain. When tutors pressed him towards spear drills, he obliged, but always asked why a spear balanced just so, why polished ash flexed differently from fir. Their answers were dry. The boy filed them into a private ledger of cause and effect. Then Heracles came home from Mount Cithaeron, wrapped in the Nemean lion's steaming hide. Courtiers backed away, but Iolaus edged forward, mesmerized by the impossible pelt. That same night, he asked Iphicles to let him follow his uncle on whatever trials awaited. He wrestles monsters, not puzzles, his father warned. Then let me puzzle out the monsters, the boy answered. Iphicles relented, and before dawn, Iolaus rode behind the massive hero toward Argolid brushlands, where gossip spoke of a serpent with heads beyond counting. At Lerna, the marshland stank of sulphur and decay. Heracles hacked a writhing neck. 2 more sprouted in its place, While most squires would freeze, Iolaus darted back to the ox-drawn cart, tore free a barrel stave, and ignited resin-soaked brush in its hollow. With torch blazing, he waded through ankle-deep mire, pressing fire to each stump the instant Heracles severed it. Heads sizzled shut. Poison steam seared his lungs. Still, he worked until the last immortal head drooped, pinned beneath a boulder. Later, as they washed in a spring, Heracles rumbled. Strength toppled the beast, but your spark kept it toppled. Iolaus felt the compliment settle like a seed in loam. So began a rhythm that lasted 12 impossible tasks. When Heracles captured the golden hind of Artemis, it was Iolaus who calmed the trembling creature with whispered Arcadian lullabies, learned from shepherds. While the unbreakable Stymphalian bird shrieked overhead, it was Iolaus who noticed that bronze castanets clashed at just the right pitch, made their feathers quiver in panic, allowing arrows to find targets. In Thrace he looped reins around the man-eating mares of Diomedes, fashioning a sliding knot that tightened the more the beast tossed. Heracles' legend grew, but attentive bards began adding a second name, the way a master mason credits the keystone as well as the arch. Companionship bred a shorthand between them. On the road, a sideways glance could mean fetch tinder or brace that gate, long before any words were exchanged. They shared jokes too small for epics. How Heracles' lion skin smelled of wet dog after rain. How Iolaus once awoke to find a baby centaur using his stomach as pillow. In Elis, while cleaning the Augean stables, Heracles proposed diverting 2 rivers. Iolaus calculated the angle of cut needed so the torrents would scour the filth, yet spare nearby orchards. Farmers downstream would later erect a modest stele. Here flowed the wit of Iolaus. When Heracles married Deianira and tried, at last, to live a quiet hero's twilight, Iolaus settled near Thebes, running a small forge that produced wheel rims so true, traders swore carts practically rolled themselves. Yet the nephew was never far, when trouble sniffed around the edges of peace. Once, when centaurs stampeded into Pholos' vineyards, it was Iolaus who galloped ahead of Heracles, scattering sheep to create a dust veil that confused the half-mad creatures, buying time for the hero's club. Another winter, he alone convinced Heracles not to punish King Eurytus' insolent son by force, reminding him that a hero's name should lift necks, not bow them. Tragedy, however, is insistently cyclic. News came that the centaur Nessus had tried to violate Deianira, and, in dying, convinced her a cloak dipped in his blood would keep Heracles forever faithful. Iolaus raced over ridgelines toward Trachis, dread nipping at his heels, but arrived just in time to see the poisoned garment fuse to his uncle's flesh. Heracles, unwilling to live half-burned, begged for a pyre atop Mount Oeta. The retinue balked. Even seasoned warriors flinched at lighting a friend ablaze. Iolaus, voice breaking like dry tinder, touched torch to wood. His eyes tracked every spark until flame consumed that Titan frame and soared into godhood. Ash rode wind into crevices. Iolaus kept a single cinder, later sealing it in bronze shaped like a seed pod. Grief might have petrified him, yet it drove him instead toward legacy. He gathered volunteers from Boeotia, Thessaly, and Arcadia, those dislodged by war or famine, and led them west to the unclaimed wilds of Sardinia. There he surveyed basalt cliffs and limestone bays, picturing fort walls rising like new vertebrae. Forests fell to disciplined axes. Terraced fields swallowed bramble. He taught settlers to temper local copper with distant tin until their trade routes filigreed the Tyrrhenian Sea. On festival nights they lit 12 bonfires along the ridge, each flame a labour remembered. Iolaus would walk the line, eyes reflecting ember light, feeling Heracles' presence in every column of smoke. Islanders said the torches burned blue at their cores, a sign the hero's divinity watched over his companion's endeavour. When age bent Iolaus' gait, he convened youths in the central square, demonstrating perfect knot-tying, sling calculations, and the trick of using 2 mirrors to see around corners. Because monsters seldom charge straight on, he gave his meteor iron dagger to a shepherd boy who had once braved wolves to save a lamb, remarking, "Keep courage sharper than the blade." Finally, on a spring morning sweet with myrtle, he donned a fragment of the old lion pelt, now soft as homespun, and sat beneath an olive whose roots he had planted the first year of settlement. Closing his eyes, he felt the earth hum, the same frequency as the Hydra marsh, the Stymphalian reeds, the pyre's last pop. The hum faded. His pulse did not return. Sardinian elders buried him overlooking the sea, placing a torch carved of cedar in his hands. Mariners thereafter claimed that during midnight storms a thread of fire would appear across the wave crests, guiding ships towards safe inlets. They called it Iolaus Road. Back in Thebes, the Mechanics Guild adopted his stylus and compass as emblem, swearing no device should leave a craftsman's bench until it worked as seamlessly as a Hydra brand sealing flesh. And each generation of brothers playing at heroes learns sooner or later the hidden stanza of the famous song, that the labours of Heracles stand half finished without the quiet spark of a nephew who understood how to make impossible feats merely difficult. Teucer, exile with a quiver of stars. Teucer's first memory of war was not the clang of spear on shield, but the bass thrum of his own bowstring. He learned to loose arrows on Salamis's wind-skinned cliffs, where gulls wheeled like omens, and the sea sang counterpoint to every shot he took. His mother, Hesione, was a Trojan princess carried west as plunder when Heracles sacked Ilion. His father, King Telamon, was a granite-hearted warrior who measured worth in cleaved helmets and storm-swift raids. Teucer grew up half Trojan, half Greek, wholly restless. In the royal courtyard, his elder half-brother Ajax practiced with spears so heavy, 2 lesser soldiers struggled to lift one. Teucer, lithe and quick, answered that brawn with uncanny precision, splitting painted knots in distant boards until the servants began carving new targets in secret, just so the prince could shatter them at dawn. The brothers sparred and laughed and bled together, a living yoke whose halves seemed unbreakable. Ajax the impenetrable shield, Teucer the arrow launched from its shadow. When Helen fled Sparta and the kings gathered beneath Agamemnon's banners, Telamon ordered both sons to sail. Ajax welcomed the summons like a draught of morning wind. Teucer felt the old ache of divided blood stir inside him. He would fight to bring down Troy, his mother's birthplace, because honor demanded it, but he vowed to sheath every arrow in duty, not hatred. As black-prowed ships knifed through wine-dark water, he tuned the gut strings of his bow and watched Ajax oil the vast 7-hide shield that would soon become Teucer's shelter and firing platform. 9 summers of siege turned fertile Trojan earth into a scar. Day after day the brothers advanced, side by side. Ajax planted his tower shield in the dust, and from behind its bronze-rimmed breadth Teucer rose, drawing the cord to his cheek until the horn tips quivered. He preferred a silent count. 1 breath, steady. 2, choose the seam between corselet plates. 3, release. Trojans came to dread the whirring ghost that arrived a heartbeat after the great shield appeared. Paris himself once felt Teucer's shaft glance off a clasp and slice away a lock of gilded hair. Only Apollo's jealous hand deflected the killing blow. When sunset glared red across the plain, Teucer's fingers were inked with bow wax and blood, yet his eyes stayed clear, for he shot not in frenzy, but in icy, mathematical resolve. After Achilles fell, and Hector's corpse dragged behind the Myrmidon chariot, grief settled on the Greek camp like ash. Achilles' divine armor, newly forged and gleaming, must adorn another champion, so Agamemnon decreed a contest. Odysseus, or Ajax, Teucer believed the verdict a formality, who had waded deeper into Trojan ranks than his ironclad brother. Yet Dawn's vote crowned Odysseus, and Ajax's jaw tightened into stone. That night the giant wandered the tents, rage flashing like lightning behind clouded eyes, until Athena fogged his mind and redirected his fury onto sheep penned for sacrifice. At first light, the Greeks awoke to horror and dark laughter. Ajax, standing amid butchered ewes, convinced he had slaughtered the kings who wronged him. When the curse withdrew, he saw only wool-dappled ruin and realized what tale the bards would carve from his shame. Teucer found Ajax sitting on a dune beyond the tents, the surf growling at his feet, the rejected armor of Achilles a distant glimmer near Agamemnon's warship. No words could stitch a mind after such rending. Ajax pressed the hilt of his sword into the sand, leaned forward, and spoke a single plea. "Remember me honorably." Then he fell upon the blade. The tide rolled in and rolled out, erasing his footprints, but not the crimson pool that stained the strand. Grief became flint inside Teucer's ribs. He lifted Ajax's body, ignoring tendons that screamed beneath the weight, and carried it back to camp. Agamemnon wanted the corpse left for dogs, claiming madness, stained courage beyond redemption. Teucer planted his bow at the High King's feet and swore he would shoot any man who denied burial rites. Odysseus, whose clever tongue had won the armor, stood with Teucer in that grim moment, and the rulers relented. On a wind-swept promontory, they raised a cairn of spears around Ajax's pyre. The smoke climbed like a black pillar, and Teucer vowed each arrow he loosed henceforth would bear a sliver of his brother's unbreakable will. When Troy at last fell to trickery and flame, Teucer moved through the ruins with gaze lowered. He spared children, guided fleeing women away from hidden blades, knowing his own mother had once been a captive trembling beneath foreign banners. But duty done does not guarantee a hero's welcome. Returning to Salamis, Teucer strode up the palace steps carrying gifts plundered for his father, gilded helmets, mixing bowls of hammered electrum, an ivory lyre. Telamon stared over the treasures at the empty space where Ajax should have stood. "You saved others, yet not my firstborn," he said, voice flat as winter seas. "You live. He lies in foreign soil. Take your prizes and your shame and leave this island forever." In that instant, Teucer understood exile's chill. He gathered what companions remained loyal, men whose injuries kept them from home, or whose own kings had forgotten them, and sailed east beneath indifferent stars. For weeks the sea offered no harbour, only salt spray that crusted beards and memories of Ajax's laughter rolling beneath shipdeck moons. Finally gulls appeared, wheeling over a green coastline where forest met Crescent Bay. Teucer tasted the wind, heard no language in its rush, and chose to anchor. He would root here like an arrowhead driven deep. They called the place Cyprus, and its people were hardy traders accustomed to pirates' shadowed sails. Teucer bartered Mycenaean bronze for timber, raised palisades, and taught the islanders to string bows of fragrant yew and sinew. When raiders came, the new defenders crouched behind wicker screens, while Teucer's arrows whispered death, each shaft a silent ode to Ajax's fallen might. In time, spice caravans docked without fear, and marketplaces bloomed with saffron, cedar oil, lapis from far eastern deserts. Teucer named the burgeoning city Salamis in defiant homage to the home that had banished him, promising its streets would know justice unmarred by pride. Years passed like sails in the distance, white at first, then vanishing. Teucer married a Cypriot woman, whose laugh rose like birds at dawn. Their children learned both Trojan lullabies and Doric hymns. On festival nights, he told them stories beside cedar wood fires, of an elder brother tall as a watchtower, of a shield broad enough to shelter armies, of a bowstring that still sang even when every other singer had fallen silent. He taught his eldest to read the wind's invisible braids, and his youngest to strike flint with steady patience, saying both skills could kindle more than flame. Old age found him on the ramparts at dusk, leaning on a hazel staff. The harbour lights glittered, gulls dozed on tide-smooth pilings. Teucer unstrung his bow for the last time, waxing the horn with motions slow but precise, then laid it in a cedar chest. "A weapon is a story," he whispered, "and this one ends in peace." Some say Hermes appeared that night to guide the archer's spirit across unseen seas, to reunite with Ajax where sorrow cannot follow. Others that Teucer's tomb stands on a cypress hill, arrows planted around it like a silent orchard of iron reeds. What endures is neither banishment nor bitterness, but the truth he carved from both. A homeland is not merely the soil that birthed you. It is any ground upon which your courage grows into shelter for others. Teucer proved that exile can sow cities, that loss can string the bough of renewal, and that even a quiver emptied of revenge may still brim with starlight for those who look up when night is darkest.